I still remember the sound of that hallway before I remember the smell of it, the particular squeak of rubber-soled shoes on old linoleum, and underneath it, always, a radio playing somewhere down the corridor, tuned to a ball game nobody in the room was watching too closely. Before I tell you about him, I need to say this once. The people in these stories are real, but names, rooms, and small details have been changed to protect their privacy and the privacy of their families. What happened and what they said stayed exactly as I remember it. I need you to know that, so you trust what comes next. 20 years ago, I had a title, a corner office, and a calendar somebody else managed for me. I will not bore you again with why I left all of that. What matters is where I ended up. A retirement home outside the city, working as an aide, doing work that people with my old resume are trained to think is beneath them. It is not beneath them. It is above almost everything else I ever did. Let me tell you about a man I will call Walter. Walter had been a foreman his whole working life, the kind of man who ran a job site by saying almost nothing and having it understood anyway. When I met him, he was 84, still built like someone who had carried things for a living, with hands that shook now, but had clearly once been steady enough to trust with anything. He did not talk much to the staff. He talked to the radio. We started listening to Sunday afternoon ball games together, mostly because I was the only one on shift who knew how to get the old transistor radio to hold a station without static. He would sit with his eyes half closed, not really watching anything, just listening, and every so often he would say something short about a player from decades ago, comparing him to whoever was up at bat now. Those Sundays were the closest thing to conversation I ever got out of him. His son visited most Saturdays, a grown man in his 50s, quiet in almost the exact same way his father was, which told me plenty about where he had learned it. Their visits followed the same pattern every time, a handshake instead of a hug. Questions about the weather, the food, whether the staff were treating him all right. 20, maybe 25 minutes, then his son would stand, say he had to get back, and leave. Walter would nod at the door for a while after it closed and then go back to the radio. One Saturday, after his son left early, Walter sat with the radio off for once and said something to me without quite looking at me. He said his son used to play second base in high school and that Walter had gone to every single game for 4 years and never once told him he'd seen him play well. He said he used to think saying it out loud would somehow make it smaller, like pride was something you could spend down if you weren't careful with it. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and he seemed to prefer it that way. A few weeks later, near the end, he asked me to help him go through an old cigar box he kept in the drawer beside his bed. Most people expect a pocket watch, a medal, something with a story. He'd tell proudly. Instead, it was newspaper clippings, dozens of them yellowed and carefully folded, going back more than 40 years. His son's box score from a regional championship game, a photo from his college graduation clipped from the local paper's back page, a one-paragraph mention of a promotion at the plant where his son had worked for 2 decades. Every single one of them saved in order, without a single note or comment written on any of them. He never told me why he'd kept them. He did not need to. I understood it the way you understand something you've seen the shape of before. He had been proud of his son every single day for 40 years. And he had built an entire private archive to prove it to himself, because he could never once bring himself to say the words directly to the one person they were actually for. Here is what most people get wrong about regret like his. You probably think the lesson is that he should have been a warmer father, hugged more, talked more. That is not quite it. The lesson is narrower and harder to hear. It was never about whether the pride existed. It clearly did, more than enough of it, saved and dated and folded with real care. It was about the belief, held for 40 years, that there would eventually be a right moment to say it out loud, a natural opening, someday when the words would come easier. Every single Saturday, he was technically correct, that today didn't have to be the day. Until one Saturday, there were no more Saturdays left. Walter died on a Tuesday in early spring. His son came, sat by the bed for most of the last day, mostly silent, the same way they had always been silent with each other, except this time there was no getting up after 25 minutes. I gave him the cigar box myself, a few days later, at the small gathering after the service. I did not explain what was in it. I just told him his father had asked me to make sure he got it. I don't know exactly what he felt reading through 40 years of proof that his father had been watching, and had been proud the entire time. I only know that he sat with that box for a long time in a folding chair by himself, long after everyone else had gone back to their cars. I have heard some version of Walter's story more times than I can count in this job. Different careers, different silences, the same shape every time. Nobody on their way out regrets that they loved someone too loudly. They regret the specific sentence they were certain they would say eventually, and never did, because eventually never actually arrives on its own. If you are listening to this, and there is someone in your life you are proud of, someone you love, and you have been assuming they already know it because you show it in other ways, I need you to actually do something about that tonight. not just nod along. Say the actual words, out loud. It will feel unnecessary because you already know how you feel. Say it anyway. Walter's regret was never that the pride wasn't real. It was that he kept it in a drawer instead of a sentence. That is the only warning I can give you from this side of the hallway. Someday is not a date on a calendar. It is just the word people use for a day they never intend to name, until there are no more Saturdays left to name it on.